Hi everybody, my name is Cameron and today we're going to be looking at communicable diseases. We're going to be looking at examples of them as well as how we treat and cure them. So let's break the word communicable down. Commune means community. Okay, so a communicable disease is a disease that requires a community or group of people to survive. So this is caused mainly by pathogens such as your viruses, your bacteria, your protists, and your fungi. They are infectious, and this is why they need multiple people. So once someone is infected, that person needs to pass the disease on to the next person for the disease to spread and grow and carry on. So they can be treated with vaccinations, okay, vaccination being a non-harmful version of the pathogen. And I say pathogen because although vaccines are mainly used for viruses, they can also be used for bacterial infections. So it's a non-harmful version of the pathogen, okay, introduced to the person so that the immune system can figure out how to fight it without being in danger of being infected by the actual pathogen. You can also use antibiotics specifically made for bacteria. Now these can be a broad spectrum or a narrow spectrum, which we'll get into later, and they have been engineered to kill a specific bacterial cell, okay, or a specific type of bacterial cell. Okay. Antifungals, obviously for fungus, and then for protists, usually we're going to be treating the symptoms and let your immune system fight the actual protist. So let's start by looking at the difference between a virus and a bacteria. Now, a lot of people would think that viruses are living organisms, but in fact, we in the science world classify them as non-living. Okay, they do not have many living characteristics within them. They're only made up of a protein coat, receptors, and genetic material. So no cellular respiration happens within them, or photosynthesis for that matter. They are very, very basic units. We usually refer to them as well as infectious particles, not even infectious organisms. Okay, so viruses are non-living, while your bacteria are microbes that are living. Okay, viruses cannot be cured with antibiotics, but then your bacteria is. So viruses are going to live and reproduce inside of a host cell. Another thing, they can't reproduce or live without something to infect, okay? Whereas a bacteria can reproduce by itself via binary fission. It doesn't need a host cell to prey on, okay, to reproduce. And then viruses, usually if you have the virus, let's say there wasn't a vaccine for it or you didn't get the vaccine for it, you have the virus now, all you can do is treat the symptoms. There is no cure for a virus once you have it other than your own body's immune system. Whereas for bacteria, we can take antibiotics, and what makes you sick from a bacteria is usually the toxins that they produce that will be harmful to your body. Okay, some examples of bacterial diseases include salmonella, which is basically food poisoning. You can get this from eating contaminated eggs or contaminated meat. Usually this comes from eating it when it's raw. Okay, so as we cook the meat, it's going to kill the salmonella bacteria, which is why we make sure chicken is very well cooked. It can cause fevers, sickness, diarrhea, vomiting. Okay, it's very, very terrible disease to have, and we vaccinate our chickens and our other meats so that it's not passed on to us, even if we don't cook the food well enough. Another one is gonorrhea. So gonorrhea is a bacterial STD, so it's a sexually transmitted disease. Okay, it's asymptomatic, but when left untreated can lead to infertility. Asymptomatic, meaning that it does not show symptoms, but then can suddenly flare up if your immune system is compromised or if it goes down. It's treated with antibiotics as well as using a condom because it's an STD. And there are many antibiotic resistant strains, meaning that these strains of gonorrhea won't be treated with antibiotics. Some of them are resistant to them. They've evolved, they've mutated to be resistant. okay, which is extremely dangerous, which we get to later. And then in plants, a bacterial infection is something called galls. Now, galls is a plant bacterial disease which can cause the plant to grow these sort of tumors, these like growths on the outside of the plant, normally on the shoots, so on the stems and on the roots. So if we need to study a certain type of bacteria, how is it that we are going to culture or grow these bacterial specimens to use in our experiments? We're going to use something called an agar dish. Now, agar is a type of medium, which is like a substance to use that we can grow bacteria on. It provides all the necessary nutrients and moisture that creates the perfect environment for these bacteria to grow on. Okay, so it starts out by sterilizing your inoculating loop, which is the apparatus we're going to use to inoculate. Inoculate meaning to purposefully infect our agar. So initially everything's sterile, even the agar dish itself, even the agar jelly itself. Okay, sterile meaning it has no microorganisms on it. How we usually do this is in pressure cookers with extreme heat, okay, or using alcohol or using fire. Okay, so inoculation is when we take that bacterial sample and we put it on our sterilized dish using a sterilized inoculating loop. Okay, and then once this, we're going to dip. So how we sterilize it is we're going to heat it on a flame until it's red hot. Then we're going to dip the sterilized loop. We're going to wait for it to cool because we don't want to kill the bacteria if it's too hot. So we're going to wait for it to cool. Then we're going to dip it in our bacterial sample. And how we do it to inoculate the agar is we do it in a Z pattern. So as you can see in this picture over here, it's going to be crossing over in a Z-like pattern on the one side, and then going again without re-inoculating it, just going over that Z in a different direction, and then once more across usually. Okay, and that's going to isolate certain colonies of bacteria that we can then use. Okay, once this is done, we're going to seal our agar. We're going to tape it shut so that it doesn't get contaminated with any bacteria in the air, and then we wait for it to grow. Okay, and they say that you can put it upside down to prevent condensation. In my 5 years of university, I don't think anyone ever told me to put it upside down. That condensation wasn't much of an issue, but apparently you can put it upside down as well. So once we have grown this agar dish containing our bacteria of interest, we can then use it to test for the effectiveness of different antibiotics on this specific type of bacteria. How we do this is by soaking these little discs, these little circles of paper in the antibiotics, and then placing those discs onto our agar containing the bacteria. We then leave it for 24 hours, and we're going to look at it the next day to see the size of the zone of inhibition around each disc. So the zone of inhibition is the zone that has been killed off by the antibiotics. So the more resistant the bacteria is to the antibiotic, the less that zone of inhibition will be, because the less effect it had on our bacteria. Okay, but the better antibiotics will have a better, clearer ring of inhibition around them. So other than vaccines and antibiotics, how can we prevent from initially getting infected by these pathogens? Well, a man called Louis Pasteur showed that microorganisms causing these diseases can be used to create vaccines that prevent the disease from infecting you in the first place. A man called Joseph Lister created chemicals that were almost like antibiotics, but more like antiseptic chemicals. Okay, and the use of the microscope also allowed us to observe these pathogens and see how they were affected by different chemicals and different means of killing them. General hygiene, so washing your hands, sanitization, separating raw meat from your other groceries so that we don't infect your other groceries that might not be cooked like the raw meat would. Hygiene for agriculture to prevent plant disease. So even on these plant farms, the workers will sanitize their tools, they'll sanitize their hands so that if one of the plants is infected, we don't infect the rest of the crop. Okay. Another one is isolation of something that is diseased to prevent it from spreading, destroying the vectors of diseases. So something like malaria. Okay. By killing mosquitoes, we will prevent the malaria parasite from infecting people. So the mosquito is not the disease, it's just a vector, it's just a thing carrying the disease. And then general vaccinations, keeping up with vaccinations and making sure we vaccinate our children so that they don't get sick. Okay, this includes something for measles, chickenpox, we've all got vaccinated for COVID-19. Some people get vaccinated every season for the flu because the flu will mutate a bit and be different each year. So some of the examples of these viruses that we get vaccinated against, at least, is the measles and chickenpox. Okay, kind of similar but different viruses. Okay, both are going to cause fever, skin rash, and it spreads from droplets and coughs and sneezes. Okay. Can cause blindness and brain damage as well as infertility. There's no treatment for it, only isolation and preventing the spread. And this is why we get vaccinated for measles. Okay. One that we don't have a vaccination for yet is HIV. So HIV is a STD. Okay. It causes mild flu-like symptoms, but it attacks your immune system. Okay, and remains hidden for many years. So you can have it without knowing, and then one day your immune system will be compromised and it's going to then give you AIDS. Okay, so when the immune system stops responding, then it becomes HIV and AIDS. Okay, and this will then lead you vulnerable to a common cold or an infection if you cut yourself. Okay, so there's no cure or vaccine, but antiretrovirals can suppress the progression of AIDS. So you can take medication called antiretrovirals, and that's going to sort of prevent you from getting AIDS, but you still will have the HIV virus. And this is why it's important to practice safe sex, okay, so that to lessen your chances of getting HIV. So viruses that we can find in plants include the tobacco mosaic virus. Okay, so it's not just in tobacco though. You can find the mosaic virus in watermelons, in zucchinis. Okay, and what it does, so it affects 150 plant species, this mosaic virus, including a big issue for tobacco. It discolors the leaves as well as destroys chloroplasts and prevents photosynthesis from occurring. Okay, and it's only prevented by good field hygiene and pest control. So there is no cure for it. Once your crop has it, all you have to do is make sure you sterilize your farming equipment and prevent pests from transferring this disease through biting your plants. So we've done some bacterial examples, viral examples, and now we're looking at the fungal diseases. So in humans at least, we get athlete's foot. Athlete's foot is a skin condition. It's usually from having moist and not dry feet for long periods of time. You can pick it up in public showers or in public bathrooms. Someone else that might have had athlete's foot, the fungus, and then if you don't dry your feet enough, you will get athlete's foot as well. It can cause itching and scabbing and cracking of the skin. Just keep your feet clean and dry. Okay. And then on plants, some fungal diseases include the rose black spot. Now, I've had this on some of my plants back home as well, and once it's there, it's kind of impossible to get rid of. There's some ways, some chemicals that you can use to treat it and prevent it, but in all honesty, the only way it really fixes itself is during winter when your plant will shed all its leaves, it sheds the fungus as well. And then that way, by the next season, when new leaves come out, they won't be infected by the fungal disease, hopefully. Okay, some examples of protist diseases are malaria. Okay, so malaria is a protist that is transported in mosquitoes. Okay, it has both sexual and asexual ways of dividing, and how it works is it's going to mate in the mosquito itself. Okay, and then once it's mated, it's then going to be deposited into the human blood system where it divides asexually. It can cause fever and eventually kill you. So we're going to take anti-malarial pills. These are pills that release the chemical into your blood that will kill any protists. So you'll still get bitten by mosquitoes, but the protist will die when it enters your bloodstream. Other than that, you can try and prevent being bitten by mosquitoes, the vector, okay, either by using bug spray or mosquito nets. Now, interestingly enough, this is a huge problem in Africa, okay, to such an extent that you have groups of people now that have mutated and evolved to have something called sickle cells. So these are blood cells that are immune to the parasite, because they have evolved a different shape. Now, these people also suffer from sickle cell anemia. They don't get as much oxygen due to the shape of their blood, but they are immune to malaria. So the human body also has some natural ways of preventing diseases from infecting us. These can include your skin, which acts as a barrier against infections from outside, from getting into your more exposed and vulnerable organs within. Okay, it's covering itself in they call it a skin flora. Okay, these are microorganisms that are going to be living on our skin that prevent these infections from other organisms or more harmful organisms. We also have a layer of healthy oil, and unfortunately, humans love to make this unbalanced, and that's why sometimes we have to moisturize, or if we move to a new country where we aren't used to it being that dry or that humid, our oil levels will be out of whack, you see, and that will cause us to excessively produce oil or to be a bit dry, you see. But this oil and the microbial organisms that live on our skin are there to protect us, you see. That's why if you're using too much soap or a too strong soap, it can cause some skin irritation, because those are infectious agents that are now going to be able to get into your skin. Okay. Others, it can just be your skin being irritated by those chemicals. Okay. But in general, the skin acts as a barrier to protect your insides from the outside world. Okay. Hairs. So we have hairs in our ears, we have hairs in our noses. Okay. And these also trap microbes from going inside of our body. In your trachea, you're going to be secreting mucus that traps pathogens from the air. This trachea is also covered in cilia, and these cilia are going to move the mucus with the trapped pathogens out into your esophagus. Okay. Another one that's not mentioned here are your tonsils. Okay. So your tonsils, which not everyone has, are going to be there to help filter or to catch these pathogens before they enter your body. Your stomach produces acid, that hydrochloric acid, that is going to kill most bacteria that is on our food. And white blood cells, of course, are our immune system. Okay, and that is if these pathogens do penetrate into the more vulnerable parts of our body, the white blood cells are there to ingest the microbes, to engulf them, the phagocytes, okay? So they destroys them and prevents these bacteria or pathogens from replicating. How they do this is by producing antibodies. Now these antibodies are going to be projections on the outsides, like kind of like receptors on the outsides of the white blood cell, and they're going to be trapping pathogens and preventing them from replicating or destroying them. Okay. Now, white blood cells are also going to produce antitoxin that is going to neutralize any toxins that may be harmful to the body that are produced by bacteria. Now, plants are also going to have their own defense systems against diseases. These can include physical barriers, okay, such as the waxy cuticle or cellulose cell walls, okay, that makes plant cells a bit harder to penetrate than your animal cells. The bark on trees, okay, another physical barrier that keeps the insides a bit protected from any animals on the outside that may want to eat it. As well as leaves falling off in autumn. We talked about this with the black spot fungus. Okay, when those leaves fall off, any bacteria or any infection of those leaves are going to die with the leaf, and new leaves are going to then form the next season without that pathogen. So that is a way of physically protecting the plant. Another one is chemical barriers. So plants are going to produce antibacterial chemicals that protect them against these pathogens. Humans can then use these antibacterial chemicals to make medicines. Okay, and the defense against herbivores. Now this can be physical or it can be chemical. Physical would be your thorns, having a hairy stem, spines that might be spines such as your poison ivy. Okay, that will inject you with some chemicals that'll make you very itchy. Okay, some other chemical defenses such as chilies. We as humans don't seem to care, but the chili has a defense mechanism to being eaten by herbivores that makes it very hot. But unfortunately for it, humans like spice. And as well as mimicry. Okay, so there are some plants that will mimic the colors and the shape of other organisms, other animals for that instance, or other poisonous plants. Okay, thus confusing confusing the herbivore from eating them. Okay. And then finally, some other plant diseases can be aphids. Okay, aphids are these insects that we talked about earlier that have adapted to boring into the stems of plants, into the phloem specifically, and drinking that sap. Okay, this will in turn obviously kill the plant eventually if the aphid infestation becomes too much. Okay, these can be killed by pesticides, but a more biotechnological and environmentally friendly way of doing it is with ladybugs. Now you can import ladybugs, you can buy ladybugs online, they come in a little package and you can release them onto your plant. They will then eat all the aphids, okay? But a lot of the time these ladybugs that you buy aren't actually grown in a lab and they are captured from nature. So you've got to make sure that your ladybugs are ethically sourced. And then another one is mineral deficiencies. So this is obviously non-communicable, but it is still a disease as it is going to be detrimental to the plant's health. Okay, so plants need nitrates to grow. Okay, nitrates are needed for protein synthesis, for DNA synthesis, and without that, the plant won't be able to get bigger and replicate. Another one is magnesium, which is needed for chlorophyll in photosynthesis, and it can all be prevented by using different fertilizers. So plants also need phosphates to grow and get bigger. They need potassium that help with root development, and all of these we are going to give to a plant through fertilizers. Okay, so my name is Cameron, and I will see you next time.